Welcome back to the fourth part of the Flutter YouTube Search tutorial course. In the previous part we've added a repository which will help us with pagination of the data. We are finished with fetching the search data from the network, which means we're getting really close to writing UI code. Before we can display data in widgets though, we need to create a state management layer. In this tutorial series, we're gonna use the business logic component pattern, aka BLoC. Hello, welcome to ResoCoder, and again we have a bunch of pre-written tests here which I wrote as I was preparing for this tutorial series, and as always you can get the code from the link in the video description, which is gonna take you to resocoder.com. So we have search state test, search BLoC test. These are two classes that we are actually gonna implement in this part, and then we are also going to create a third class in this part which will be search event. If you have completely no idea about how a BLoC pattern works, I have a separate tutorial about that, so you can definitely check it out, and you are highly encouraged to check it out from the card in the corner. Once you know the basics of BLoC, we can move on. So first let's look at the search BLoC test, because there are a bunch of goodies which will help you understand how we are going to implement this BLoC, because as I said in the previous part, tests are really a living documentation for your production code. So first we have some initial state, which will be search state initial, and then we have a group search initiated. This is the first one, and then another group is fetch next result page, and there are no more groups after that. So search initiated is a group, and it will also be a search event. Events are passed into a BLoC, and then states, for which we also have a test, which is currently not yet working because we don't have these classes. States are put out of a BLoC. So events come in, states come out. BLoC is like a real block, a box, where the events come in, then subsequently inside that block, data is fetched, it's somehow filtered, edited, joined, or whatever, and then that modified data is coming out of the BLoC in the form of a state. So in our case, what is gonna be coming inside the BLoC is search initiated, and for searching we need to input a string, right? We need to input what we are gonna be searching for. So for example, ResoCoder on YouTube. But when what we are searching for is just an empty string, it will return simply initial state. So basically it will be empty, right? But what does it mean that it will be empty? Well, before we can proceed with this search BLoC test to understand the BLoC, we probably first need to implement the state and also the event, so that these errors at least can go away, that the search state is not present. For creating the BLoC and all of its accompanying classes, we're going to create a new folder under data, or actually under lib. It will be called UI. Inside that UI, we're gonna create another folder. Its name will be search. And over here, we are gonna create three files: search BLoC, search event, and search state. All right, let's first implement what is gonna be passed into the BLoC, which will be search event. It's gonna have one abstract class, search event, which will be the base class of all the events. So it will be base class of search initiated and also of fetch next result page. Then we want to have search initiated, but because it will hold a query, it's probably the best to make it a built value class. It will be a simple BLT, so built value class called search initiated. And its fields are gonna be only one field, which will be string get query. Now, because this is a built value class, we need to also add the built value header, so BLTH search event. And let's remove all of the not needed import statements here. And let's also add a class fetch next result page, which will be only a simple class extending search event. And let's not forget also the search initiated will extend search event. Now let's save this file and let's open up the console so that we can run the Flutter packages. pub run build runner, and let's say watch, because we are gonna also add a build value in the search state file. Now the build value code will be generated. Cool, so now once we have the classes which are gonna be passed into the block, let's create the classes which are gonna be passed out of the block, or actually only one class, which will be the search state. Search state will be a full-blown build value class, so again, build value header, search state. Let's create a simple build value. And now what do we want to know in the UI to somehow modify the UI to reflect what is going on in the block? The UI needs to know whether or not we are currently loading the data, so bool get is loading. Then the UI also needs to know the actual search results which it should display, which will be contained in a build list containing search item. So let's import that. Get search results. Then also, if something goes wrong, we need to know the error message, which we will display in the UI. So for that will be string get error. And finally, because we are gonna have a paginated list view, we need to also tell the UI whether or not we have reached the end of results. And if you want to learn more about paginated list view, I have a separate tutorial about that, which you can check from the card in the corner. So bool get has reached end of results. Now let's save this file so that the generated file will be actually generated for us. Once we have that, we are basically done with search state, but it would be not all that efficient to use in our code from our time standpoint, because it would take a lot of code to actually create such search states where we would need to constantly set up all of its properties here when we instantiate the class. We want to simplify things a bit, and we are going to add a bunch of factories for that. We have the default factory, which accepts a search state builder, but on top of that, we want to create a factory search state initial. It will be a named factory, therefore. And inside this initial factory, we are going to return the initial state. And what will be the initial state actually? It will be a search state. Over here, we are going to call the default factory. So it will grant us a builder. And on this builder, we want to set is loading to be false, because initially we are not loading anything. We are just waiting for the query string to be input into the block. Then also search results will be only an empty search result list. So we want to replace the search results build list with a new build list containing search items. So it will be an empty build list. Then also the error will be set to be an empty string. And finally, has reached end of results will be also false by default when we are only initially launching the app. Similarly, we want to create 3 other states like this, which will be loading, failure, and also success. And as always, you can get the code from the link in the video description. So we have loading, which will simply only change is loading to be true. Otherwise, everything stays the same as in initial state. Then failure will simply change the error to contain an error message, and an error message is also passed into the or actually not constructor but factory body. And then we also have success, which accepts a result list, which is a build list of search item, and it simply replaces search results with this populated result list. Now we have all of these nice factories to simplify the instantiation of the search state, but we don't have anything to simplify the checking for whether or not the current state is loading or whether or not the current state is successful and so on, because we want to check for these particular states which are created by this factory and also this success factory from the UI to change somehow the UI to display different things, right? Currently, all we can do is to create a long if statement in the UI to check whether or not loading is true, and also search results is empty, and also error is empty, and also has reached end of results is false. So it will be a long if statement, and we want to compress it down to something shorter. For that, we can create helper properties over here right in the search state, and actually we have a test for that already written. Let's import search state right now, and the test simply says that there will be a property called isInitial, which will return true only when instantiated with initial factory. So we have here a bunch of search states, all of them are instantiated with a different kind of factory, and isInitial will return true only for the initial factory search state. Then similarly we have isSuccessful, which will return true only for the success factory. So let's implement this test right inside the search state.dart. We are going to create these helper properties right below these normal properties. So they will be isInitial and isSuccessful. isInitial will simply say if isLoading is false and search results is empty and error is also an empty string, its initial state. Then successful, if it is not loading, search results is not empty and error is an empty string. And actually we don't need to do this kind of trickery with equals equals build list search item which is empty. We can just simply say is empty. This is something that I probably didn't know of when I was preparing for this tutorial series. And over here we can simply say is not empty, and it should actually work, which we can check right now because we can run the search state test. So let's go over there and let's go to debug and let's say Flutter run all tests. So obviously we have a bunch of errors in search block tests, and also because of that the other tests are not even run, but we have run the search state test successfully and it works just fine. So we have the search state now fully implemented. Now we can finally get to the search block test, import the search state, and let's take a look at it, shall we? So when we are passing in the search initiated event, the block will emit basically nothing, which means only initial state, for an empty search string. That makes sense. If we have nothing to search for, we are not going to display anything, and therefore we are not gonna change the state. Then also, it will emit loading and success for a valid search string, because we first have to fetch the data from the network through the data source and then subsequently through the repository. Then that data will get over to the block. During all of this, we are loading the data. So we want to display a loading indicator in the UI. For that, we need to emit loading state. And then once that data is fully loaded, we can emit it through the success state, and our UI will then display that data. Then similarly, it will return loading, success, and initial for a search string, which is first valid and then empty. That also makes sense. Then the next test says that it emits loading and failure when a repository throws a YouTube search error. So we are simulating that the YouTube search error is actually thrown from the repository, and then we expect the failure to happen. And when something like this happens in production code, we will display a nice error message to the user. While this test is dealing with a YouTube search error, we also want to have a test and actually also implement that test for no search results exception. It will do basically the same, so that it will show a nice error message to the user saying that there are no search results for a given query string. This is all there is to the search event. Then later on in this part we are gonna get to the fetch next result page event. But now let's first implement the functionality inside the block for the search event. We first need to create a block, and for that there is a nice VS Code extension called the BLoC, so you can search for it over here. Just type in BLoC, you can install it. It's right from Felix Angelov. Once you have that, you can go over to your searchblock.dart and simply only type in BLoC. We're gonna call it search block. The event is search event and state is search state. The initial state will be search state dot initial, and we're gonna implement map event to state in just a little while. Now let's import search event and search state, but so that we don't have to import these two classes separately, let's create an export file, so to say, right inside the search folder. It will be simply called search, and it will export search block, then also export search event, and finally also export search. I have a problem typing in English because I'm Slovak and the pronunciation is completely different, so I actually have to say differently. For example, search is search, so I have to say it like that. It doesn't matter. That's why I have a lot of typos as I am writing. Anyway, once we have these three things exported, we can go over to search block and import search state and search event only by importing search.dart. If we go back to the search block test, we can see that we are calling over here on search initiated directly on the search block. On search initiated is only a really simple function which takes in a query and then it dispatches a search initiated event with the query set on that. We are inside the block and it will need to fetch the data from the repository. So let's create a property, or actually a field, final YouTube repository. And also let's set this field up directly from the search block constructor. So this .YouTube repository will be passed in. And also let's call the super constructor here. And let's also import YouTube repository. And let's get to implementing map event to state. If the event is search initiated, and if the event's query is an empty string, as it is set in the tests, we then want to yield search state initial. The state of a block is a stream. We are inside a async generator function which returns a stream, and whenever we yield something from an async generator, we are adding one thing to the stream. In this case, we are adding one search state initial to the stream. Else, so if query is not empty, we want to first yield search state dot loading, and while we are loading, we wanna fetch the search results from the YouTube repository. We need to wrap that inside the try catch block. That's because we wanna catch all of these different kinds of exceptions, and here we wanna create final search result, which will be equal to awaiting YouTube repository dot search videos and pass in events dot query. Once we have these search results, we wanna yield search state dot success containing the search result. Then whenever an exception happens, we wanna catch it and we wanna specify the type of an exception. In Dart, it's done a bit weirdly, in my opinion, because there is no thing like in Java where you specify the type of exception right here. So for example, YouTube search error, something like this just doesn't work in Dart. You need to specify the exception class before the catch keyword, and you need to provide on keyword, so on YouTube search error, catch E. Let's import YouTube search error now. We cannot import it for some reason. That's kind of funny. Let's import it manually. So YouTube search error is directly inside the model search and YouTube search error right over here. So we need to import YouTube search tutorial, then data and model. And from that we wanna import search, and from that YouTube search error, but we cannot see what we are importing actually, so let's type it all out. So YouTube search error.dart, and now it's imported right over here. And whenever we catch YouTube search error, we wanna yield search state.failure, and the failure will contain the error's message. And similarly, when we catch no search results exception, we also wanna yield search state.failure, and it will contain message. Alright, but this is quite messy because we have nested if statements, and that is just not cool. We also have a nested try catch block therefore, and that is definitely not good because there is multiple layers of nesting. For that, we are going to extract this inner if statement and create a separate function for it. It needs to also return stream containing search state. It will be called map search initiated. It will have one parameter, which will be the search initiated event. And now even this function needs to be an async generator. Inside this function, we can just paste the code which we have cut from the if statement above, and we want to call it in a special kind of way from map event to state. We want to write yield and then also that little asterisk, and over here we want to just call map event or map search initiated and pass in the event. Now let's take a look at the fetch next result page in the search BLoC test. So whenever fetch next result page event is passed into the BLoC, we want to emit success if fetch next result page call is successful, which kind of makes sense. Then we want to emit current state with a changed property called has reached end of results to be true when there are no more search results. So that means there are no more pages of the data. And when something like this happens, we want to change the UI not to display a loading indicator as the last element of the list view. But we will get to that later. But if you have watched my tutorial on pagination in Flutter, you will already know this stuff. Then we have another test, which is for emitting failure if fetch next result page is called before the search has begun. When something like that happens, there is a search not initiated exception thrown from the repository because we cannot possibly fetch the next page when we have not even fetched the first page. And then another test is that failure happens when repository throws a YouTube search error even while getting the next page. And this is it for the search BLoC test. So now let's get to search-bloc.dart. Now you can see even more why we have created this separate map search initiated function, because now we are going to have another event over in map event to state, and this map event to state function would get really long and we do not want that. So now let's create another else if event is fetch next result page. And let's again write it first directly in map event to state, and then we are going to move it to a separate function. So the first thing we want to do when we get a fetch next result page event is to get the next page from the repository. So we again need to wrap it in try catch block, get the next page results from the repository, which is as simple as calling fetch next result page at the repository object. And you can notice that we aren't emitting any loading state when we are fetching the next result page. That's because we do not need to display the loading indicator in the UI when we are getting the next result page, because the loading indicator will be at the bottom. If we take a look at it on an emulator, this is the finished app, and you can see here that when I search for ResoCoder, for example, and I start searching, we're gonna get the loading indicator in the center. But as we are getting to the next page, so when I swipe down or swipe up actually, the loading indicator is only at the bottom. And that loading indicator is done in a way that we do not need to know it whether or not to display it from the search BLoC state. The loading indicator is actually there even now when we do not see it. It's just an element inside the list view. Alright, so once we have next page results, we want to yield search state.success. And here comes the thing. Fetch next result page doesn't return all of the items which are on all of the pages combined. It only returns the last page's items. Because of that, we need to concatenate the items which we already have with the items which are new from the next page. So we can do that by concatenating current state dot search results with next page results. A special kind of exception is on no next page token exception. We actually don't need the exception over here in the catch block, so we can just specify an underscore for the parameter. And whenever we get this kind of exception, we want to yield but we do not want to yield a new state, but only a modified current state, which is a field of the BLoC. And we want to rebuild this current state. So we get a builder, and on this builder, we want to change some things, and we want to directly change has reach end of results to be true. Then we want to have also other catch blocks, so on search not initiated exception and also on YouTube search error. Now we can again cut the code from this else if block and create a separate function down here, which will again return stream search state. It will be called map fetch next result page. This time we don't want to pass in anything to this function. It will also be an async generator, and let's just paste the code which we have cut. And now let's call map fetch next result page from this else if statement. So we want to yield with an asterisk map next or map fetch next search or map fetch next result page. Oh man, these names are too long for me. And once we have that, we are basically done with this search block. So we have created map search initiated and also map fetch next result page functions which handle their events. And also actually it has just now struck me that we, similarly to how we created on search initiated function which simply dispatches search initiated event, we also need to create fetch next result page function which will simply dispatch fetch next result page event like this. Once we have even this done, we can now go to search block test, import everything which needs importing, which is only the search block. Let's actually import the whole search.dart. Now we do not have any errors inside the search block. So let's go to debugin, and hopefully we are not gonna get the exception was thrown but not caught error, because it just happens with this tutorial series. So let's run all of these tests and they should really pass. For some reason they don't pass, so I am again going to use my keyboard shortcut. Actually, not that they do not pass, they haven't even run. I don't know why. And when I use the keyboard shortcut, it has all passed. We have here the search block test, and both search initiated and fetch next result page groups have passed completely successfully. And actually one tip at the end, so that you know what kind of a keyboard shortcut I'm using, we can go to File, User Settings or Preferences, Keyboard Shortcuts. So Ctrl K and Ctrl S is the shortcut for getting to keyboard shortcuts. And the keyboard shortcut that I'm using is Ctrl Alt and this thing, and it's Dart run all tests. So if you just search for run all tests, or we have to stop recording keys, so just run all tests, and you have Dart installed, you want to select that, create a new key binding, select whatever key binding that you like, and then when you press this key combination, you're going to run all tests. And for some reason this key binding works better than simply calling it from the debug tab. I don't know why, I honestly have no clue, but it's just how it works. Alright, and that's it for this part where we have created the search block, search event, and also search state. Definitely subscribe to this channel and also join the notification squad by hitting the bell button so that you don't miss any of my new videos, even from this series, but also other kinds of videos from Flutter and also my vlogs and every single video that I upload. If this tutorial helped you, be sure to give it a like and also share it with other developers who may benefit from knowing how to create blocks in a real application. Leave a comment if you have anything to say. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter, and see you in the next video.